Really, the book of Acts, as we introduced it in the beginning, was what we said was this was a journey from Jerusalem to Rome. Right? The book of Acts starts in Jerusalem, right? Chapter 1, you've got the 11, and then they add 1 to make 12, right? And you've got the anticipation of Pentecost, the disciples are gathered, Jesus teaches them, he ascends, we're in Jerusalem, right? And then we made progress all the way through the book, and the last chapter of Acts 28, now we're in the city of Rome. Jerusalem to Rome. And so we're going to talk about Paul's journey at the end of Acts, in chapter 21. At the end of the third journey, Paul returns to Jerusalem and is arrested. Why is he arrested in Jerusalem in chapter 21? What happened? Yes, Arlen?
They accused him of bringing Gentiles into the temple court.
Yes. Which he didn't, which he wasn't, but they accused him of it, and Paul gets arrested and taken before the Jews, and then ultimately before the Romans in Jerusalem. He's held there for 2 years in Jerusalem. Remember, in Jerusalem, when Paul's being held by the Romans, and he's about to be flogged, what does he say? I'm a Roman citizen. Don't you dare. And they don't. Right? Remember the contrast in Philippi, where he was about to be flogged? And he took it for the sake of the jailer and didn't claim Roman citizenship. So it's a little different tack that Paul took. So he's arrested, held in Jerusalem for 2 years, then he's transferred, like in the dead of night, with a contingency of people, transferred from Jerusalem to Caesarea Maritima. It's about 25 or 30 miles down the mountain, 3,500 feet, Jerusalem, down to the coast, Caesarea Maritima. The harbor city that Herod the Great had built, huge harbor city. It was the seat of Roman government in the land of Israel in the first century. So, for example, in Jesus' day, Pontius Pilate lived in Caesarea Maritima. Right? That's where he lived and stayed and ruled, Pontius Pilate. In Paul's day, now we're in the late 50s and early 60s AD. We have Roman procurators, people who came after Pontius Pilate, ruling in Caesarea Maritima. Can you name a couple of them who actually appear in the book of Acts? And Paul stands before and talks with. He obviously doesn't talk to Pontius Pilate, he's dead. But 2 of his successors in the book of Acts, they're mentioned by name.
Felix, one of them?
Felix and, not Cassius. Cassius was with Brutus.
Oh, right. Which one's Festus?
Festus.
Felix
and Festus. These are 2 Roman procurators who have the position of Pontius Pilate, the Roman appointed ruler in Israel. And so they're in Caesarea Maritima, and Paul is taken before and held for 2 years in Caesarea. Probably in the palace of Herod the Great. Of course, Herod the Great's been long dead, right? 60 years dead. But there's a palace there and a jail and all that. He's probably being held there for 2 years. And he appears before Felix, presents the gospel, right? I get them mixed up. But one of them said, "You're crazy. You're a madman. This is nuts." The other one said, "What, you think in so short a time to make me a Christian? When it's more convenient, I'll call for you again." And I think those are 2 responses that our world still gives to the gospel. Isn't it? It's crazy, or get back to me on that. You know what I mean? Like it's a fake interest. Like I don't think they really mean get back to me. I think it's just a polite way to say shut up. I don't want to hear anymore. So I think Paul got that, right? And then Paul appeals to Caesar because he's a Roman citizen. And he has that privilege to appear before Caesar. So he's taken from Caesarea Maritima all the way to Rome. And it's a journey that covers 1,400 miles and takes 1 year to get from Caesarea Maritima all the way to Rome. It's a long journey. Lots of stuff happens along the way. And it's a harrowing experience because there's a shipwreck out in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean. This is an ocean, everybody. It's called the Mediterranean Sea, but it's an ocean. right? And the shipwreck out in the middle of the sea, and they're for 2 weeks, they're being plastered by the wind and the waves, and then they run up on the island of Malta, right there. It's actually it's a pretty dramatic story in this chapter. Holy cow, it's really awesome. And so we're going from Jerusalem to Rome.
Was it like a hurricane or something?
Yeah, it's called, in fact, Scripture calls it a nor'easter. It's just kind of a weather, I don't know, just a northeast wind, that we're gonna get to I'll get to it, the map. It blows them off course. They wanted to stay on Crete. This is Crete, everybody. They wanted to stay on Crete, and they set sail, or they were gonna move from one end of Crete to the other end of Crete. And they let go on this end, hoping to get to this end, but the wind, nor'easter, blew them out into the Mediterranean, and thus the shipwreck. So it's called just a hurricane, northeastern wind, blew them off.
Oh shit. So you're gonna get to that?
Yeah, there's ship. I mean, there's some pretty sizable ships in that day, and
So there was like 250 people?
yeah, there's 276 prisoners, 276 plus crew, Roman crew and Roman centurions and all that. So there's probably over 300 people on this boat that shipwrecks. Every single one of them survives by the sovereignty and grace of God, and Paul said so. Don't abandon, I'm getting ahead of myself. Don't abandon the ship. Because if you do, you got to all stay with the ship, and we'll survive. Go ahead.
First century ships, like they went in, yeah, I guess I can Google it, but.
Yeah, they're big, sail, I mean, obviously not motorboats. These are sailing vessels with huge sails, right? And yeah, they're pretty sizable. And Roman shipping and Roman trade and travel was really awesome. So here we go. There's the excursion. You know, from Caesarea, they go up to Sidon. They go to the north of Cyprus, which is interesting because Paul's from Tarsus. There's Tarsus. And the ship goes, I mean, Paul can see the land. He can almost see where he grew up. Isn't that? Come on, you ready? I just think of the emotions of Paul. After all this time and all what he's been through, and now he's being taken as a prisoner to Rome, and he passes by his hometown and can see it from the boat. Okay, you're not correct. Here, and then to Crete, and then they wanted to go here, and they're blown off course, shipwreck, Malta, Syracuse, and on up to the Appian Way to Pompeii, Puteoli, the Appian Forum, the 3 taverns. All these places are mentioned in the chapter, and then ultimately to Rome, the most beautiful, largest city in the world. And Paul had never been there. He had never been there. And now he's going to get there, albeit as a prisoner and a slave.
Ben-Hur. Remember that?
Cherry
scene?
places.
Remember the scene on the ship where all the slaves were?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think it was like that?
Maybe, yeah. Could be. I don't know. I don't know all the
Same time.
nautical details.
Same time, it was a Roman ship that he was rowing.
Although in this chapter, Luke gives many, many, many nautical details. That's what's cool about this chapter too. The historical accuracy of a sailor.
The soundings.
Yeah. And the anchors and the wind.
Like, the ships only have sails, or, 'cause I was thinking, like, how do you?
Row.
They had rowers
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Oh, okay. I was thinking, like.
Oh yeah, there's rowers and sails. I mean,
Rower
wind
and-
power and wind power. It's
Oh.
just-
Cool.
So they make their own. There's an underwater archaeologist who probably has been 10 or 15 years ago now or so, believes that he has discovered the 4 anchors of the ship at the bottom of the Mediterranean. There is a lot of skepticism and doubt about that. But he made a movie out of this, and I'll just show you the trailer. You want to see the trailer? It's about 2 minutes. Whatever. Here you go. For what it's worth.
On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. Fearing that we'd be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight.
These could be the first objects that are man-made, that are mentioned in the Bible, that we have found through research and archaeology.
Well, this is something huge. If this is right, this is history in the making. No two ways about it. It's a big thing. This is historical. There's nothing else you can say.
All right, that's it. I mean, there's a lot of doubt and skepticism about that. And it's been questioned, and I don't actually think that those are 4 anchors, but that's my humble opinion.
So they claim to have found them then?
Yeah, they claim to have found 4 anchors. And that's the whole thing. The greatest biblical discovery of all time,
Money grab.
which actually is the Dead Sea Scrolls. So be quiet. So, yeah, it's all movie, it's all, this has not been verified. This is the opinion of this, basically him alone. So, but they made a movie out of it, and they did a whole thing. I doubt it. So, anyway. So here we go. So in Romans 15, so when Paul writes Romans, he's in Corinth at the end of the 3rd journey, right? Acts 19, 20. Are you with me? So he's at the end of the 3rd journey. He writes this. He says, to the Romans, he says, there's no more place for me to go. I plan to visit you. I plan to do that when I go to Spain, and I hope to see you while passing through. So at the end of this 3rd journey to the Romans, Paul says, I'm coming to Rome. I'm coming to Rome to see you guys. I guess Paul never thought he'd get there as a prisoner. But that's what's going to happen. That make sense? Also in Acts 23, while Paul's under arrest in Jerusalem, the following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. So it's kind of interesting that as readers of the book of Acts, even Paul himself, he's kind of given the assurance he's getting to Rome. Paul has this passion that he wants to go to Rome. He wants to go to Rome. Why does he want to go to Rome so bad, do you think? We can only speculate, but
That'd be where he would be able to set up his ministry to the gospel of Spain, like his headquarters.
so he wants to go there. You're right, Jason. He wants to set up kind of a home base for the westward movement of the gospel, right? Always been. So there's that. In fact, he says that in Romans. And I don't know, biggest, most prosperous, beautiful city in the whole world. Why shouldn't the gospel be brought there? I also think, and I think there's hints of this, that Paul wanted to appear before the Caesar himself and proclaim Jesus as Lord. Do you think Paul would have shied away from such a message in such a setting? Heck no. I think he couldn't wait. And there's some hints in the New Testament that he might have gotten to do that. We'll get there in a minute. Wouldn't that be awesome to appear? Now, the Caesar at that time would have been Nero. And of course, it is Nero who traditionally is the one who executed Paul. So maybe he does appear. Now, of course, that's not till later in the second Roman imprisonment, but nevertheless, right? So, yeah. So this is an interesting book too, The Voyage and Shipwreck of St. Paul by James Smith. Because as the textbook, I think the textbook even mentions this book, doesn't? I think it does. You read the textbook, it does. Because for many, many years, the historicity of the book of Acts, and in particular, chapter 28 has been questioned. It's not historical, it's not accurate, and then now more and more it's being verified. You know, the titles, the Asiarchs, the Politarchs, Gallio, right? All these things, the towns, the names, the leaders. And then this, so this is what he writes in the book. No sailor would have written in a style so little like that of a sailor. That is to say, no sailor a sailor is going to write like a sailor. No man, not a sailor, could have written a narrative of a sea voyage so consistent in all its parts unless from actual observation. The point is, Luke was on the boat. He was there. And he's an experienced sailor, and he wrote historically, nautically accurate details of the ship. That's pretty cool. And I think that's just awesome. And we can count on this as trustworthy. All right. So I think the purpose, and then we're going to go back and talk about this, but just to give you the overview, I think the passage of this purpose is historical accuracy of Luke. He was there. God's sovereignty in all of this. Haven't we seen, remember at the beginning of the class, we mentioned the sovereignty of God, you know, to plant a church, to grow a church in people's lives, and God is sovereign over all this. So we're going to see more of the sovereignty of God, and we're going to see more of the wisdom of Paul as a leader. So, accuracy, God, Paul, and we'll kind of talk about this. That's what the book talks about, right? Here we go. So let's break it down. I'm on the outline. I know I am. So, the we sections continue. Remember the we sections in Acts? You know, we, and it kind of comes and goes. Well, here we have a we section. Luke is with Paul, and he tells the story in 4 detailed stages. And I mean detailed. These are detailed stages. 4 stages. The first one is Caesarea to Crete. So here's the text and some maps, just to get that picture. So there's Caesarea, right? And here's Crete. So we're going from Caesarea to Crete. So here we go. First of all, if you read the text, he stops at a place called Sidon. Graciously, the Roman captain allows Paul to get off the boat and visit some of his friends inside. That's pretty nice, isn't it? Where's my arrow? Oh, my arrow just keeps going. So he gets off the boat in Sidon, and then the boat goes to the north of Cyprus, lands here, they get on another boat, and then it comes to Crete and Fair Havens. Okay, so that's the text. When it was decided that there's the we, should sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded the ship, about to sail for these ports in Asia. We put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. So that's one of Paul's friends too, right? So Luke, Paul, Aristarchus. And then these 276 prisoners and Roman crew. The next day, we landed at Sidon. And Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to see his friends so that they might provide for his needs. Isn't that nice? The grace of God. From there, we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus. So the lee of Cyprus means the lee of nautical people. Well, to the good guy?
The side of it?
Well, the side of it.
I know what it means, I just can't say it.
Specifically the north side, the protected side.
Skylar, I know what you're talking about.
The close to the shore side, the lee side. So to the north of Cyprus. Because the winds were against us. We had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia. That's Paul's home area. And we landed in Myra and Lycia. So here we go. Follow the arrow, there it goes. So to the lee of Cyprus, then Myra and Lycia. Does that make sense? Pretty cool. Sorry, Caesarea, Sidon, to the lee of Cyprus. Tarsus is right here. That's where Paul's hometown is, so to see it. And then they land here. And then they're going to get on another boat and sail out to Crete. The centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made headway slowly for many days, difficulty arriving off Cnidus, another island. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salome. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens, near the town of Lasea. So Myra, they get on the boat. Cnidus, just mentioned, right? This is Crete. They're going to go to the lee of Crete, north side. There they go to the lee of Crete, and then the wind is going to blow them down. Does that make? It's explained here. I'm not making it up. It's in the text. And now this is Crete. So they get to Lasea, and they're going to end up on this side of Lasea. They're going to get to Fair Havens. With me? Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, late September, winter is approaching, not a good time to go out into the open sea. That's why he warned them. The Day of Atonement, the time of year, don't do it. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to the ship and cargo and to our own lives. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, Fair Havens, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach the other side of Crete at a place called Phoenix, and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. So here we go. They're in Fair Havens, and they want to get to Phoenix. Paul says, don't do it. Don't do it. It's winter, open sea, don't do it. But remember, they didn't listen to him, and they're going to get stuck out in the open sea. So that's stage number one, right? From Caesarea to Crete. Are you with me? I think this is yes. Stage two, the storm at sea. And Paul's wise leadership at sea. That's what we notice. Here we go. So we're on Crete, Fair Havens, and they want to get to Phoenix. Paul says no, but they go anyway. And what happens is we get ourselves a shipwreck. Come on. That's pretty cool.
It is.
Come on, it is pretty cool. Come on.
How old is it?
About 15 or 20 years. So, when you get kind of cool, then there was a time when I went way overboard on animation and sound effects.
You showed us.
I've kind of ramped that down a little bit, like we don't need all the animation and flying in. What's that one thing they had after PowerPoint? Prezi.
Yeah.
Remember Prezi? Oh my, I got it. Remember Prezi, anybody?
Yeah, I remember it.
That gave me a headache. I did it once, and things are flying in, and like, man, I'm getting dizzy. I can't do this. I'm sticking with PowerPoint. Anyway, that's pretty cool. It's a shipwreck, and I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, we got it. So it's just pretty. So, when a gentle wind began to blow, remember they're trying to go from Fair Havens to Phoenix? When a gentle wind began to blow, they saw the opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. You following this in your mind's eye? Before long, a wind of hurricane force called a northeaster swept down from the island. The ship was caught by storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along out into the open sea. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So the men hoisted it on board. Then they passed ropes onto the ship itself to hold it together because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars. Then they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. This is pretty detailed, isn't it? The ropes, the lee, the islands. the place names, it's pretty accurate. Not pretty accurate, it is accurate. So here we go, Cauda. And they got pushed off, all the way to Cauda, trying to make it to Phoenix. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, the storm continued raging. We finally gave up all hope of being saved. That's pretty drastic, isn't it? And Luke wrote that. I don't know, anybody been out on a boat? You been out on a boat? I mean, boats are cool, water's fun. You ever been on a boat in a storm? Where was it?
A boat, we were in our kayaks on Lake Michigan. They started getting pretty windy, and that got very, very fast.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
my dad tipped over, and he got back in, but then we were able to get safe from the channel. But just a little sketchy.
It's scary. I mean, it is. You're out of the water, man. And you hear this all the time on the news, right? People getting caught, the Coast Guard having to go out, people overboard, all that kind of stuff. It's scary, right? I was on, my little experience was on Lake Mac. And I went, well, my buddies, we were fishing on Lake Macatawa, everybody in Holland. We're out fishing on Lake Macatawa. All of a sudden, the wind starts blowing, this big dark cloud comes, and I'm telling you, Lake Mac got rough. And we're in this little boat, and we're boom, 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 you know, the waves, you know how you go up on the boat, and then boom, pound down, and up, and boom, like that. So much so that, you know, the glass in the front of the boat, that thing with the, you know, the hatch and the glass for the, all of a sudden we came down, boom, and then all that glass shattered. And it's all over the inside of the boat. And we're trying to get back to right across from the Ottawa Beach Inn, Lake Ranch Motel. Is it still called the Lake Ranch Motel? Nobody knows. You don't know what I'm talking about. But it was like, yikes, are we getting back, man? Your boat's a mess. It just, the glass all shattered and it's getting pounded. It was scary. And that was just in a little boat on Lake Mac. These guys are out for 14 days in the middle of the ocean. They're going to die. And they think so, right? So Paul's wise leadership. Notice this. Paul's the only calm guy on the whole boat. A call for courage. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice." I don't tell Paul. He can't resist. I told you so. I told you guys not to go, and now look what happened. Don't do too many I told you so's. That's not really good, but we're going to let the inspired author of Scripture do it. Men, you should have taken my advice and not set up the creed. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Wow. That's Paul speaking into a disastrous situation with the wisdom of God. That's pretty cool. Last night, Paul says, an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, "Do not be afraid. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me." What an awesome testimony in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of a storm. Isn't it? An angel. This is from God. I have faith in God. We're going to make it. God told me I'm going to stand before Caesar, so we're all going to get there. Isn't that? What a calming influence in the middle of a tragedy. We'll get to that. A call to stay together. On the 14th night, how do you like that? 2 weeks. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight, the sailors sensed we're approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. Notice the details. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. There's the 4 anchors that this guy thinks he found. I doubt it. So they're dropping anchors, they're approaching land, they're on their way to Malta, this little bitty island down here. Right? In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors left the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow, so their crew wants to get out of there. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. They listened to Paul. Don't escape. Don't run off on the lifeboats. And they said, okay, sounds like you got like an inside track to God. We better go with it. I mean, like in a desperate situation, you get desperate for God. Or somebody who's speaking the voice of God to you to remain. Isn't that right? It's an opportunity for witness right there. And then a call to take food. Look at this, Wyatt. Look. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you've been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. What does that sound like? Who does that sound like? Remember from Jesus? Not a hair will fall from your head without the will of my heavenly Father. Remember that? Sounds like Jesus. And Paul says about the same thing. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat. Sure sounds like communion, doesn't it? He took the bread, he gave thanks, he broke it and gave it. Doesn't that sound like communion? It sounds like it. I don't think it is. It can't be. It can't be. Why can't it be? It can't be.
They weren't believers.
Yeah. You don't serve communion to unbelievers. It's for believers, right? It's a supper for the family of God. So I think all this is Paul giving a witness by praying at the table and giving them a meal. I mean, I've had it. Have you had it in restaurants? I have. I like to pray out loud at restaurants. Some people pray silently. It's okay. I like to pray. I pray every time at a restaurant before we eat. And I've had it several times where I either prayed with my family or I prayed with a buddy or having breakfast. I've had it several times that people have come up to me and said, hey, I noticed that you guys prayed. That's really awesome. Thanks. You know what I mean? Just a witness. Yeah.
We get that all the time at Rainbow.
Yeah, you would work at a restaurant.
We have a lot of elderly couples that sometimes pay for younger couples' meals. Just 'cause
Yeah.
they say they're praying.
And they pray, right? And especially the Rainbow Grill, it's how's it going? There's a church in every corner, and only one Rainbow Grill. So, no, I'm just kidding. I know they're not all great. Who knows if they're all? I don't know. But the point is, what a witness, huh? What a witness! To say, hey, we're going to eat, fellas, because you haven't eaten in a while. Let me give you some food. Hey, by the way, let me say thanks to God first before we eat. And then he hands it to them. He serves it to them. Isn't that awesome? I mean, this is what Paul, come on, you guys. We've learned a lot about Paul, but this is too much, man. I mean, not too much, but he does it all. I mean, he sells the popcorn, he prints the bulletin, he preaches the sermon, he shovels the sidewalk. I was a pastor at a church where I had to do that, actually. No kidding. I printed the bulletin. I didn't print it. I wrote the bulletin and all the announcements. Sometimes on Sunday morning, I would go over to church, and the custodian hadn't been there, so I'd get the shovel, and I'd actually shovel the sidewalk. No, I'm not kidding. My kids handed out the bulletin. We didn't sell popcorn, but you know what I mean. Paul's doing everything at this point. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea.
How did they fast for 14 days?
Well, they didn't fast. I mean, it's a storm. They're probably not fasting. They're probably just busy, scared witless.
Yeah.
And
You can forget to...
hey, all decks on, all hands on hands. All hands on deck. And, batten down the hatches. Oh, I already did batten them down. Well, batten them down again. That's from Bugs Bunny. Did you get that one, Simon?
I did that one. I don't, not specifically, but I know.
Batten down the hatches. I did batten them down. Well, batten them down again. That's Bugs Bunny. Those are real cartoons. Daffy Duck. Daffy Duck. Okay, do you want to shoot me now or wait till I get home?
Shoot me now.
Shoot him now, shoot him now, shoot him now, shoot him now. No, aha, pronoun trouble. It's not he doesn't have to shoot you now, it's he doesn't have to shoot me now. And I say he does have to shoot me now, so shoot me now. Yeah. And his beak goes on backwards. All right, sorry. Where was I? Well, how did we get to that?
6, 7.
I have no idea. You asked a question.
Yeah, they went 14 days without eating anything.
Oh, batten down the hatches. So I think they were just panicked. I don't think it was a fast. I think Paul is saying, hey guys, you gotta eat some stuff. We've been like crazy for 2 weeks, doing stuff, bailing water, throwing cargo. We gotta eat. Because when you're in a desperate situation, you don't eat.
Yeah, 14 days though, I don't know.
It's a long time.
I'd have like blood sugar problems.
Well, you gotta drink because you can't survive for 14 days without water.
Right. And they probably like snack here and there, but like to take the time to actually sustain yourself.
Sure.
Like,
Not that they hadn't eaten anything.
Right.
They probably had like a snack bar or something like
I
that.
like crumbs here and there. Grab a handful of grains that,
Maybe one of those.
I mean, he says you have and gone without food, you haven't eaten anything. So it kind of sounds like they have.
We're not gonna try to figure out the details, we're just gonna say, hey, Paul, you're awesome for serving food. They were all encouraged, and they did great. Okay, shipwreck on Malta. So now we make it to Malta. Right, the land and the soundings, and now they're on Malta. So we get to Malta. Escape from the sea. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, at the same time untied the ropes and held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the... Do you notice the details in this? The sail, the ropes, Luke is writing all of this and exactly what they're doing. The ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken into pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away, escaping, right? But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest got there on planks or other pieces of wood from the ship. In this way, everyone reached the land safely. Swimming, hanging on to pieces of wood. Can you imagine 300 people washing up ashore onto the beach? Hey, Ralph, you okay? I'm good. You okay? Yeah, me too. Did we all make it? Yeah, look at, we're all here. Can you imagine when they number off? Okay, let's number off, everybody. Did we all make it? We're all here. What a miracle. And then didn't they recall Paul's words? I told you you'd make it. God told me you'd make it. You know what I mean? See the witness? Bonfire on the beach. Safely on the shore, we found out that the island was Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire, welcomed us home because it was raining and cold. That's nice. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, wait a minute. He's serving the food, he's gathering the wood? Come on, Paul. Don't we have like high school kids to go out and gather the wood? Camp Geneva, or the counselors are gathering the wood. The director of Camp Roger is not gathering the wood. Okay, sorry. And a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging onto his hand, they each said, this man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live. But Paul shook it off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time, seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. Remember Lystra? You're Zeus and you're Hermes. Right? And then, oh no, now they want to kill him. So they took him as a god. Healings. There was an estate there nearby belonging to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us into his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. How do you like that? Paul goes to the governor on Malta's house, and he gives him a little meal and some drink and welcomes him. His father, Publius' father, was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. My goodness, Paul. Is he ever going to stop? And the answer to that is, of course not. He will not stop until he's dead. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And I'm going to keep going 100% until I'm gone and Jesus calls me home. That's pretty awesome. Which is one of the reasons don't feel like, I don't know, some people retire and walk on the beach and collect shells. I have friends, I know people that, they get a nice boat, they walk on the beach, they go out to eat, which is fun for a while. But I don't really want to ever do that. I don't know. I just don't feel like showing up before God someday and saying, look at all these cool shells I found. I'd rather say, man, I worked and prayed and sweated and served my whole life long until you called me home, until I had no strength. That's what okay, sorry, I'm just giving you my own. Because I have people ask me, I'm getting up to that age where they ask me, hey, when are you going to retire? And my answer is always the same, I don't know. I do this for free. But, you got to do something in life. You got to do something.
You're close to 65?
No, not that close. But you gotta do something, right? In life, you can't just sit at home watching TV eating bonbons and potato chips. You got to do something. So why not do this? Okay. Anyway, do something with your life. Paul's a good example. When this happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with, Paul is healing everybody on Malta. He's shaking vipers off. He's healing the governor's father. Pretty cool. Everybody good? All right. Now, this is where the textbook comes in. So, some lessons from the sea voyage. First of all, I mentioned this. We learned more of the accuracy of Luke. I'm not going to say anything more about that. We just read it. We have a deeper insight into the character of Paul as a leader. He's an agent of hope. How is Paul an agent of hope on this boat?
Through the word of God, mostly people see how calm and collected he is, and it's always because God has revealed something to him. God has been working with him. He's promised him that he will go to Rome, and so people believe him when he says, we're going to be fine, we're going to get there. God has came and spoke to me and said.
I think so, right? Do you ever, when a tragedy strikes, when a disaster strikes, when some really awful thing comes, there's people who kind of panic, right? And they lose their minds, right? And maybe you've been there. Do you notice that there are other people who in the midst of that thing just remain calm? God's going to see us through. Or like Daniel's 3 friends, our God can rescue us. But even if he does not, we're still not bowing down to a stupid statue, Nebuchadnezzar. I just paraphrase that. That is an amazing statement of hope, isn't it? Our God can rescue us. Oh, our God can rescue us. But even if he does not, we're not giving in. And I think Paul gave that same testimony, don't you? Our God can rescue us. But even if he doesn't, I'm going to remain calm. I'm going to be an agent of hope. I'm going to be a witness to Jesus. Are you following me? I think that's what a powerful witness, to be the person who remains calm when everybody else is going crazy. Because you have such confident faith in God. Because you have such a settled assurance in your identity in Jesus. Because you know that nothing can touch you. Your soul and your faith. Are you with me? And that's a cool, I know, I got to get used to it because I am one who tends to panic when things go wrong at the smallest little things, right? I go crazy. It's like, calm down. Just calm down. And it's going to be okay. Paul's an agent of hope. That was awesome. Human wisdom. How did Paul show human wisdom?
Like we remind them, you gotta eat, doesn't matter if the boat doesn't sink, if you starve to death, take care of yourself, maintain your strength so that you have the strength to fight another day.
Yeah. Yes, it's that, but it's all along the way. Paul's giving advice, right? Hey, you guys got to eat. Hey, you got to stay with the boat. Hey, don't sail on the winter sea. I told you so, but nevertheless, I'll pray for you, and I'll serve some food, and just Paul is the, sometimes people, the world looks at Christians and they don't think that we have any street smarts. Y'all are just a bunch of naive spiritual people who really don't have anything relevant to say to the real world. Come on, am I right? I mean, and this is how people sometimes look at Christians. They do. Like you guys are shit. Like you guys are just a bunch of goody two-shoes who go to church, who are a bunch of spiritual people who read your Bible all the time, and you don't really have, when it comes down to really running a business or really doing stuff in the real world, you guys have nothing to offer. Y'all just praying and reading the Bible. I'm just being facetious here. And I think what Paul shows here is, oh no, I got some street smarts. You know who was the most experienced sailor on that boat of all of them, all 300? Who was the most experienced sailor? Who had been on the most boats? Who had been on the sea? Paul! He had traveled on boats. He'd been all over the Mediterranean, sailing on these 3 missionary journeys. Paul was an experienced sailor. And so was Luke, who's writing about this. And I think that they demonstrate some really cool street smarts. Take some food. Don't sail in the winter. Put the ropes around the thing, right? And he's just giving them, I think it's pretty cool that we can offer. Paul was a tent maker. So I think if we can go into a secular culture and meet them on that level, right? Not just going in, and I know obviously you ultimately have to get to the Bible and Jesus and the resurrection, but you have to build up trust first. You know what I'm talking? You got to build up trust. Go out to eat with your pagan friends. Go out to eat with them. Hey, let's share a meal, man. Let's have some fun. Hey, let's watch the football game. Hey, let's go hunting. You know what I mean? Hey, want to go fishing? Well, you guys know about fishing. Well, actually, quite a bit. And so it's just to build up some street cred. Am I wrong? I don't know. I think Paul did. Man, he's amazing. A man of God, a man of faith. The Agora, the marketplace, Athens, the academy, the Areopagus, the synagogue, the boat, the prison. What an amazing story. Clear and appropriate testimony. Didn't Paul give a clear and appropriate testimony on this boat? An angel appeared to me. God spoke to me. I'm a man of faith. Let me pray for our meal. It's a clear and appropriate testimony. And I think Paul is always witnessing to the gospel wherever he is. Which brings up, and it's a bit dated example of this, but every once in a while you'll get an athlete or a celebrity, right, who will give their testimony to Jesus and faith, right, every once in a while. I thought it was pretty cool, that guy, like in March Madness, the little short guard from Kansas State, the guy who beat, the team who beat Michigan State, what was that guy's name?
Richard Johnson, maybe.
It was a little short guard. He was from New York. He became like the star of the, anyway.
How about Chris Pratt in that Disney?
Okay, there's that. But I'm talking about this guy, and in the interview afterwards, they asked him, and he just said, he ended his interview with, blessings. Blessings. Who ends their interview blessings? You know what I mean? It's not, hey, God, help me shoot those 3-pointers, man. God, thank God. Sometimes you hear that, right? You kind of wonder, what kind of a testimony is that? Jesus, help me score touchdowns. Okay, that's dumb. But if you just give a clear and appropriate testimony, you know what I mean? Just a man of faith, and give me a clear testimony, not jamming it down, not making it something kind of flamboyant, but just giving a clear, appropriate testimony. What was that guy's name? Began with an N. Noel. Marquise Noel. There you go. And once in a while, there's people like that. My favorite Christian athlete with a clear and appropriate testimony. Who? Well, there's Tim Tebow. There was Tim Tebow too. No. This is maybe, I would say, an athlete who has achieved at the highest level of his sport, has remained humble, and has given a clear testimony of Jesus. Okay, Okay, Kirk Cousins, okay. He hasn't quite reached the top of his sport. He is never beat a good team, Kirk. But anyway, he doesn't beat a good team. He doesn't. Come on. He's a nice guy, but who has he beaten? Okay, sorry.
Scotty Sheffield.
Okay, no, okay, Scott Shep. No. You won't know this guy because I don't care. But Mariano Rivera. Does anybody know who Mariano Rivera is? Oh, you guys. Mariano Rivera. He's the greatest baseball closer of all time. You know, the guy who comes in the ninth inning and gets the last 3 outs. They count that as a save. If you record the 3 out, they say you got a save. So he is the person who has the most saves in baseball history. Are you with me? And this Mariano, not to mention that he also played for the Yankees. Not to mention that he also won 5 World Series. Not to mention that he's the greatest baseball player, pitcher, closer of all time. Are you with me? You know, he's not A-Rod. He's not Alex Rodriguez popping his mouth off, who's doing stupid stuff. He's not Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is an idiot. He's a good golfer, but he's an idiot. So you shouldn't say it that way. He's an immoral man. Anyway, that's my humble. What was that? Mariano. He's remained humble. Do you know that what he's doing now? I mean, he's been out of baseball for about almost 8 or 10 years now. He and his wife co-pastor a church in New York. It's unbelievable. They co-pastor a church in New York. He wrote a book. If you get a chance, I don't know. He wrote a book. It's called The Closer, because he's a closer. And in the book, part of it, he says, now that I've retired from baseball, I'm making real saves. You get a save when you. And of course, what he's referring to is saving people for Jesus and pointing them to Jesus and saving them in their sins. I mean, come on, that's awesome. So once in a while you hear that. This is a little dated example, but it's a good one because do you know the Masters golf tournament? You know the Masters? A tradition unlike any other. That's what the stupid voiceover is every time they have that tradition. Anyway, the Masters is like one of the most important golf tournaments of the whole golf season for professional. It's played in Augusta, Georgia. And if you win it, you get a green jacket. Right? They put a green jacket on you. You know the Masters, everybody? It's played the second weekend in April every year. So because of the timing and the scheduling and when they play the Masters, every once in a while, because they play the golf tournaments Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Always the last day is on a Sunday. Every once in a while, because of the scheduling and the timing, and they play the second week in April, you know what I'm going to say, is that the very last day of the Masters happens on Easter, which it did this year. It happened on Easter. John Rahm won the Masters this year. He didn't give it wasn't a big testimony, but he did reference Easter in his interview. He did say the word Easter. He didn't go any further, but he did say that. So there was a guy who did win the Masters many years ago on Easter, and he gave an even clearer testimony. His name is Bernhard Langer. Bernhard Langer, everybody? No. He's a German golfer, Masters champion. This is way in the 80s. It's a long time ago. April 7, 1985. And they asked him after the match, Bernhard Langer, this must be the greatest day in your life. You just won the Masters, the greatest golf tournament. You just won. And this is what he said. This is the greatest day of my golfing life. But there are far more important things in life than making a putt, or missing a putt, or winning a championship, or losing a championship. To a Christian, Easter Sunday means everything when we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He said that in his interview Everyone, the masters. I don't know, that's pretty impressive, everybody.
Scotty Scheffler gave a testimony after
And
he
golf,
won last
golf,
year too.
and golf,
Yeah,
right?
he won the Masters last year, and on the panel after the round on Sunday,
Yeah.
he said that they asked him like, how do you stay so calm and collected out there? We don't see you getting frustrated. He said, it's my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Me and my wife wake up every morning and read the Bible, and he said he's the only one. He said he tries to golf to the glory of God, play and compete to the glory of God. It was really good. It was, you don't want to just, it's very like quick, because people on the television program just want to talk about golf. So they give this little spiel, but he gave a testimony, gave a witness.
Yeah. Every once in a while, I'm not a professional athlete, I don't have a very big sphere of influence, but once in a while God gives you a platform, a really big platform. Tim Tebow, Scotty Scheffler, Earl Longer, you get a big platform, right, where the whole world is watching you. And then to give a clear and appropriate testimony, right? That's pretty cool. Yeah, what was I gonna say? I lost it. Maybe we can just Scotty Scheffler, Sunday. I don't know, it was gonna be good, but I lost it.
Platform.
Play a platform, get a platform. Yeah, I don't know. It's just good stuff though. When you hear somebody do that, right? And they just give that good, clear, humble testimony. And I mean, there are several examples, but you know, celebrities and sports figures and people who get that platform. That's pretty cool to mention Easter and resurrection and all that. Okay, I'm still trying to think of it. I lost it. Okay, move on. Look, servant's lifestyle. Paul collects the wood, he serves the meal, he does the, you know what I mean? He's the Apostle Paul. And yet he's modeling servant leadership. And isn't that what's attractive? I think the textbook actually mentioned that in India, when there was a huge conversion to Jesus Christ and Christians in India, that what was attractive about it was that the leaders, the people who evangelized to them, gave a humble servant attitude. They didn't demand, money, anything like that. Just they served them. They served them with love. And they said that was so attractive. Because usually it's people who come and, you got to do this. We're over you. We're in charge of you. And yet, if you can be a servant leader, that's attractive. All right. And thirdly, we have a greater appreciation for the sovereignty of God. How do we see the sovereignty of God in this chapter? Lots.
It's like the main thrust, I think, of the voyage.
Yeah.
I think it's the main thrust of the chapter. The wind, it talks about the wind blowing them. That's completely and totally God's sovereignty. Like the viper. Yeah.
It's all God, isn't it? I mean, God wants to get Paul to Rome to testify. He promised him years before, you will get to Rome. You will get there, and I will get you there. And so I think this is a story. As readers, we already know ahead of time Paul's going to make it. And yet you read this, it's like, I don't know. I don't know, God. I know he said he was going to make it, but that doesn't look good. Have you ever been there? Like God promised you something, and you believe it, and you follow it, and then you get down the road and you go, I don't know, God. And you up to this? I don't just, you know what I mean? And here, I think as readers, we're taken through the sovereignty of God. You're going to make it. And yet we wonder. And of course, the sea, everybody, this isn't just the wind and the storm against Paul and God. You know what? Because the sea to Jews represents chaos, the abyss, evil. The Jews were not sailors. They were farmers. They were construction workers. They were not sailors. They didn't like it. The sea is chaos. So this is not just the sea and the wind against Paul. This is Satan himself. This is the imaginations of the evil one trying to thwart the gospel of God. Does that make sense? And God says, oh, no, you don't. Not by imprisonment, not by storm, not by threats, not by anything. And the sovereignty of God gets
I watched a video once that's like super helpful, and it uses this chapter as far as like God's sovereignty and man's responsibility, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like particularly in salvation, like how do the warnings relate to believers? You know, the warnings of like, you know, apostatizing and things like that. Like, you know, if I'm saved, if I'm sealed, how, you know, how do I relate to these warnings? And they use this chapter, right? Because God says all of these people are going to be saved, right? So he proclaims it. You know, every single person's going to be saved. But then Paul warns the people: if you get on that boat, you'll die. If you get on the lifeboat.
Yeah.
So God already said it. He proclaimed it, and the warning was almost like a railing, like a rail guard to keep them from actually falling off. So it's like,
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I thought it was really helpful. Like,
Yeah, it's good. I mean, these are lessons for life, for ministry, obviously giving a clear example, giving appropriate warnings, inviting, I mean, that's all, right? That's all part of the gospel. And Paul's been doing that all along, right? You know, he wrote this, Paul wrote this. Wonder what he was thinking about. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who call according to his purpose. And I bet you Paul said, you know, he hadn't had the shipwreck yet when he wrote that. Right? Hadn't had it yet. But when he had the shipwreck, did Paul look back and say, yeah, oh yeah. In him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out everything in conformity to the purpose of his will, in order that we who were first put our hope in Christ might be able to praise his glory. The will and sovereignty of God in your life and mine. Does that make sense? I know you're 20 years old. I know you don't know where you're going to live or what you're going to do or what's going to happen after graduation. Maybe you're scared to death, like of next Friday. I don't know. But God has a will and a purpose and a plan for your life and my life and everybody's life. He does. And he's going to work it out. He's going to do it. There's going to be some twists and turns in the road, everybody. There are going to be a few shipwrecks. You're going to be out in the middle of the sea once in a while. But you're also going to stand before Caesar and present the gospel. Does that mean? I'm an old guy. I've been in the sea a few times. Panicked. Giving a bad example. Rome. We got to do it. It's just 5 minutes. We got to do it. Rome. So, the arrival in Rome is point number 4. So when we got to Rome, says Luke, Paul was allowed to live by himself, a soldier to guard him. House arrest. This is not a dungeon. This is not a prison. This is house arrest. Paul can receive guests and visitors, and he does, and he talks to them. Now, there's going to be a second Roman imprisonment, and that's going to be a dungeon, and that's 2 Timothy. I'm going to die. Come and see me, Timothy, before I die. And then he dies. This is the first Roman imprisonment, it's house arrest. So, we're on, remember, we left Paul on Malta. We're going to get to Rome. Oh, there's Rome. I got all these pictures of Rome. We're not going to do it. After 3 months on Malta, put out to sea, he mentions these places: Syracuse, Rhegium, Puteoli. Right, here we are: Syracuse, Rhegium, Puteoli. We came, and also we came to Rome. The brothers and sisters there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and 3 taverns to meet us. Can you imagine some of the Christians in Rome who came out 20 miles to greet Paul along the way? Can you imagine the encouragement that Paul felt when he saw these believers coming down the road in the opposite direction, believers that he had already written the letter to the Romans to? He didn't met them. He wrote to them. He didn't met them. He didn't plant the church there. And now they come out to meet him. That's pretty cool. The 3 taverns. At the sight of these people, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. I guess so. I guess so. Isn't that cool? I long to see you. So I may impart to you. Oh, this is Romans 1, where he said, I want to come and see you, and then he does. Philippians. Puteoli, the 3 taverns. The 3 taverns is not a bar. They didn't stop off at the bar like, hey, let's meet at the. It's just it's a motel. It's a resting place. It's a lodging area. That's all it is. Keep going, right? And on we go. And Paul is traveling on a road, a very famous road, called remember we talked about the Via Ignatia? Remember the Via Ignatia that went like this and then connected over here to the Appian Way. A paved highway to Rome. You know how you're traveling, and you're going to go from, Byron Center, to Chicago, or something like a big city, and then you get closer to the big city, what happens to the highway? All of a sudden you get like 14 lanes, right? And it's like the whole road opens up, and there's lanes, and it's beautiful. It's like, wow, man, this is cool, And that's what the Appian Way was. The oldest, straightest, and most perfectly made of all Roman roads. And the Roman roads were awesome. A little bit of how the road was made. I'm just gonna go. The road began as a level dirt road upon which small stones and mortar were laid. Gravel was laid upon this, which was finally topped with tight-fitting interlocking stones to provide a flat surface. The historian Procopius said that the stones fit together so securely and closely that they appeared to have grown together rather than have been fitted together. The road was cambered in the middle. What does that mean?
Slight bend.
So the water washes off, like a soccer field, like a soccer pitch, like football, like all our roads, all our highways are like this. So the water runs off, are cambered in the middle, and there's for water runoff, and had ditches on either side of the road which were protected by retaining walls. What an amazing road! And Paul's on the Appian Way, headed for Rome. And then he witnessed to the Jews, and then he did all this other stuff, and he did all that other stuff. And then we have the very last two verses of the book of Acts, and I'm going out like this. This is how we go out. Because this is how Luke intended us to go out. This is big. I've been waiting all semester for this. Now I have 1 minute. For 2 whole years, Paul stayed there at his own rented house and welcomed all who came to see him. He proclaimed the kingdom of God and taught about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. And Floyd Ogilvie, pastor, chaplain to the United States Congress and Senate some years ago, said the abrupt ending to Acts, which we just read, the abrupt ending leaves us with a challenge and opportunity to allow the Spirit to write the next chapter in the book of Acts today, in and through us. Acts has 28 chapters. You will live out and write Acts 29. He proclaimed the gospel with all boldness and without hindrance. In other words, no internal restraint, right, for boldness, nothing on his inside stopping him, and also without hindrance, no external obstacles, with the Roman Empire. He proclaimed the gospel with all boldness and without hindrance. And I think Luke meant to end there to encourage the church. Now you go write chapter 29. Now you go write chapter 29. Isn't that a cool thing? What a cool strategy that Luke had there. And I just think that's pretty awesome. So, go write chapter 29, everybody. Proclaim the gospel with all boldness and without hindrance until the day you die and Jesus takes you to heaven. That's my plan. All right, we're done. That's my sermon. I'm done. I'm out. That's what I have to say about that.